파월 아저씨가 등장했군요. 자, 비트 이제 어떻게 되는 건가? 금리 종료, 서프라이즈 발표할 듯. 뭐 이렇게 예상한 사람도 있긴 있네. 대선 8까기 초입이다. 뭐 그럴 수도 있죠. 미대선이 언제지? 얼마 남지 않았죠. 아직 새벽에 안 주무시고 오셨군요. 자, 파월이 지금 연설을 하는 중인데요. 파월 라이브.
With many other factors, actual and expected changes in the stance of monetary policy affect broader financial conditions, which in turn affect economic activity, employment, and inflation. Financial conditions have tightened significantly in recent months, and longer-term bond yields have been an important driving factor in this tightening.
이거
We remain
저작권
attentive to
걸리나?
these developments because persistent changes in financial conditions can have implications for the path.
소리는 듣죠 뭐.
My colleagues and I remain resolute in our commitment to returning inflation to 2% over time. A range of uncertainties, both old ones and new ones, complicate our task of balancing the risk of
파월 나온 거 치고는 뭐 변동성이 별로 없네.
Doing too little could allow above-target inflation to become entrenched and ultimately require monetary policy to bring more persistent inflation.
가자 비트코인. 파월 형 한마디만 해줘라.
Given the uncertainties and risks, and given how far we've come, the committee is proceeding carefully. We will make decisions about the extent of additional policy firming and how long policy will remain restrictive based on the totality of the incoming data, the evolving outlook, and the balance of risks.
어디 누가 해석해 주는 거 없냐?
Alright. Do some Q&A.
박수가 나와.
Q&A part's gonna be good part. Let's see.
끝났네?
Q&A.
연설은 금방 끝났네요.
Where are you going? Oh, good. Sit down.
아, 아직 대화하는 게 있네. 질의응답 같은 게 있나 보네. 지금 이제 자리에 앉아서 질의응답을 하는 것 같습니다. 조금 비둘기에 가까웠다. 오, 비트 올라가는데? 오호. 자, 이제 뚫고 우주로 한번 가야 되나요?
Yes, so we certainly have a very resilient economy on our hands. We've got the economy growing strongly. If you think back a year, many forecasts called for the U.S. economy to be in recession this year. Not only has that not happened, growth is now running.
안 들려.
People getting jobs with first high nominal wages, and then as inflation has come down, real wages, which is a story of much stronger demand. There may be some ways in which the economy is less affected by interest rates. It's hard to know precisely, but for example, many companies, any company with bond market access will have termed out its debt, right? And therefore may not be feeling the effects of higher rates. The same may be true of homeowners who have a long-term fixed rate, low rate mortgage, who then are therefore not, because it's not an adjustable rate or a higher rate, they're not feeling that increase in rates. So the economy may be somewhat less susceptible to the effects of rate increases. On the other hand, if you look at interest-sensitive spending, these are very much the places where we expect to see and do see effects. So, for example, in housing or in the housing sector has been sector has been very affected
이거
by
누가
higher
해석해주고
rates as
있네.
purchases of durable
뭐라고 돼
goods. If you
있습니까?
look at surveys, people will not say that it's a good time to buy a car or a house. Quite the contrary. So we see policy working
미국의
through its
경제
usual
매우
channels.
탄력적이고
It may just
강력하다.
be that rates haven't been high enough for long
성장이
enough.
현재
And
장기
again, it's
추세를
all
넘어서고
happening in the
있는데
context
놀라운
of
일이다.
very strong
현재
demand.
성장이
We've heard
장기
also
추세를 넘어서고
maybe the
있다.
terming out of debt, as you say, both corporate debt and household debt.
지금 미국 경제가
may
굉장히
diminish the
탄탄하죠.
effectiveness
경제는
of rate
강력한
hikes.
수요에
Do
대한
you have a
이야기다.
view on whether that's true? And
경제가
if it is
금리
true, what
영향을
does it
덜
say
받을
about monetary
방법이
policy?
있을
Does it mean
것이라
you have to go
생각한다.
farther
경제가
in the rate hikes, or
금리의
you just don't have
영향을
the power to
덜
affect it?
받을 오 이게 약간 좀
So no,
중요한 것
I
같은데
don't think
금리가
that
높은 수준을
there's
유지하지
a fundamental
하기
shift
때문에
in the way that
여태까지
interest rates affect the
영향이
economy.
나온 것
There may
같다.
be some
여태까지는
differences
금리가
in this
오랫동안
cycle
충분히
because of what
높은
I mentioned. As I mentioned,
충분히
we are
높은
seeing
수준이
the effects
아니었던 것
where we
같다.
expect to see
금리가
it, which is
경제에 미친 근본적인
interest-sensitive
변화에
spending and
대한
also asset prices,
변화가
as an example.
있다고 생각하지 않는다.
And the exchange rate,
이
which
맞는
are also
해석이냐?
seeing strong exchange rate, which
금리가
is
경제에 미치는
inflationary. So
근본적인
I
변화에
don't think
대한
there's a fundamental change in the way monetary policy
이번
affects the
정책이
economy.
지속되면서 더
And
이상
again, it
수요와
goes back to just very strong
구매력이
demand. We take the
하락하는
economy
것으로
as
보이겠어.
is. We take fiscal policy and the economy and all the things we don't control. They come to us, and we conduct policy always to achieve maximum employment and stable prices. So we just take what comes. The fact that we have a strong growing economy, a strong growing labor market, and inflation coming down. These are the elements that we want to see that to achieve the outcome we want. It may take more time, but ultimately, this is the kind of thing you would want to see along the path to getting through this.
연준은 최대한 투명하게 정책과
How much
방향에서
effect
공개하기
thus far
시작했다.
has the Fed had? We all have memorized now long and variable lags. How long and how variable, and where are you in that process? Are you at the
떨어지노.
25% point, the 50% in terms of seeing it in the effect in the real economy?
So there's no precision in the in our understanding of how long lags are. One thing that has changed in the modern era is that markets now, over the course of the last 30 years, central banks have decided instead of being secretive to be very transparent. And what that has meant is that markets move actually well in anticipation, well before.
연준은 정책 변화를
The transmission
주도해왔다.
from policy moves to financial conditions actually happens before the moves now, whereas that was not the case 50 years ago when Milton Friedman coined the phrase long and variable lags. So, but now you have financial conditions changing, and the question is, how does it affect the economy? The standard channels are asset prices, interest-sensitive spending, and the exchange rate, for example. And again, we do see that happen.
연준 의장이 돈
Just
많다고
not as
했다고요?
fast as we would like, and I would attribute some of that to just stronger demand. Household savings were turned out to be higher. Household spending has been stronger, and that's by far the largest part of the economy.
In order to conduct monetary policy effectively, do you need at least a hypothesis about how much has already hit the economy? Because it's hard to know how much more you need to do if you don't know how far you've come.
So on lags, I think if you think back, it's been a year since the last 75 basis point hike we did. It was the November meeting in 2022. The first one was in June, so it's more than a year. So we should be seeing the effects. By the way, they don't all just arrive on one day. They arrive and then they're thought to peak and then to diminish. So there's a lot of uncertainty around lags. And one of the reasons why we have slowed down significantly this year is to give monetary policy time to work. The truth is, though, you can find academic support for different speeds and duration of lag. So we have to use our
통화 정책
eyes
효과가
and a
나타나게
little bit
될
of risk
것이라
management
믿는다.
and patience in slowing
여태까지
down the pace to make
진행했던
sure that we are
금리
seeing
인상의
full effects. And I
통화
think,
정책
again,
효과가
that's
나타날
part
거라
of why we've
믿는다.
slowed down this year. We went very quickly in 2022 to catch up to where we need to be, and now we're moving carefully with these decisions.
So when you spoke back in August of 2020 and sort of laid out the revisions to the framework of the work,
어느
you
정도
said
효과
that in terms
나타난
of
거
anticipated
아닙니까?
growth, sort of consensus had gone from something like 2.5 to 1.8%, I think were the numbers you laid out in that. Where are you now? Where's the
새벽에
Fed? Where
급등
are you? What do
씌웠냐고요?
you think basically the long
지금
run growth is?
그럴지 몰라서
Long-run potential growth
기다려보고
is not
있습니다.
something that moves around a lot over time.
지금
But I would
코인들이
say
그래도
my
뭐
own
조금
guess
오를
is it's around
코인들은 좀
2%.
올랐어요. 좀
I think that the
올랐나도
standard
오고 아까 솔라나 좋아
mainstream view
보인다는데
would be a
올라
little bit below 2%, but I would just say
지나지 안
2%
올라갔는데
real growth over time. And what causes growth is growth in
코인이
hours
조금씩
worked plus growth
오르는데
in productivity, growth in hours worked is a function of population growth in the long run, and also labor force participation. Many things affect productivity. But if you drop in reasonable
현재 정책을 매우
long-term
신중하게
estimates, hours
하고
worked
있다.
growth and productivity, which is just output
잠재적
per hour,
성장률은 크게
productivity
변하지
growth, you
않았다.
get something around
2%다.
2%, and that's
대부분
higher than
국가들은
most other advanced
높습니다.
economies.
As you look at it,
중립금리,
you
금리가
see
어디까지
historical precedents for having
어떻게
a
될지
growing
예측하기
economy
어렵다.
with high rates over a long period of time. I mean, as you look back, I mean, is it like the late 90s, for example? What analogies do you draw as you try to determine what this might be doing to the economy in the longer term?
So that's really a
아직은
question
뭐
about
좋은
what
소리가
the
없는데 아까 좀
level of
전에
rates will be going forward, what the neutral level will
좀
be. And
포인트가
I think
되는 얘기를
it's
하는
very
것
hard to
같은데
know
특히 높은
confidently
금리에서
what the
경제적
answer to that will
성장은
be in 5
분석하기
years.
매우 어렵다.
Some of the reasons why rates were low for the last 25 years were just the aging of the
우선
global
전반적으로
population and
뭐 인플레이션이
globalization
심하니까
and, you know, so lots of savings
뭐
and
어떤 액션을
relatively
취해야 된다
aging
그런
population,
건
savings
아니고
greater than
그런
investment, so
얘기는
rates are lower.
없고
And productivity was low. So all of those led to low interest rates. So what has changed with the pandemic? You might see less effects from globalization.
떨어진다.
Certainly demographics, the aging of the global population has not changed.
떨어진 거냐?
I mean, this is a discussion we're having on an ongoing basis. It doesn't really affect current
일단
policy,
뭐
but
아직은 좋은 얘기가
where
없군요.
will rates settle out? What will be a normal rate? So if a typical Fed tightening cycle would leave you at 5 or 6%, and this is in the before the pandemic and before the low inflation.
연설문은 좀
had Fed
내용
rates of 4 or
괜찮았는데
5% or even higher frequently. Are we going back to that? I really don't. I wouldn't want to speculate. I mean, my guess is it'll be somewhere in the middle. but
아직은
I
지금
don't know.
이제
I think we can say this now.
질문에 답을 하는 중에는 약간 매파적이었다.
We're very
뭐
concerned
이런
about that. Right now, we're very far from the
거고요.
effective lower bound, and the economy's handling it just fine. But that's because we're at a time of really elevated demand coming out of the pandemic as we reopened with fiscal stimulus and monetary stimulus. We have very strong demand in the United States. Hard to know
새벽까지 기다리려니까
what the
빡세네,
economy will
이거.
want in the way of interest rates when 5 years from now, when all of the effects of
주요
the pandemic are behind us.
증가 재정 및 지원금으로 인한 추가적인
You talked about it again
소비가
back in Jackson Hole in August of 2020. Back then you said you thought the sort of consensus had come down. I think it was from like 4.25% to 2.5%. Where is it today?
네, 황유수님 어서 오시고요.
So
오늘은
by any
보죠.
reckoning,
제목
long-term
완전
interest rates
운명의
and
날
the
아니냐,
neutral
운명의
interest rate came down
자,
steadily
운명의
over the
날.
course of several decades.
어떻게 될 건가?
So where is it today? I
어디로
don't
운명이 될
know.
건가?
You know, we're finding it basically.
운명의 날 아니냐.
The idea was that I think the median indication of what the real
어디로
neutral
가야
rate was
되냐?
around 50 basis points
비트코인.
before the pandemic. It may have risen in the near term. The real question that matters though is will it rise in the long term?
운명에 너무
that we don't
생각보다는 많이 안 올라가네.
But do you need to know it in order to conduct monetary policy? I mean, you must have to have at least a theory. I mean, I'm not saying you have to be right about it, but you have to have a hypothesis, don't you? As you look at the data, you have to put the data through some sort of theory.
피곤해라 새벽까지
We all
기다리려니까.
write down our estimates of the longer run.
통화
neutral rates every
정책의
quarter.
끝이 어디일지
That's
모르겠다.
based on models. It's based on also looking out the window and including
이제
lags.
금리가
thinking
경제를
how
어떻게
are our
반응하는지
current
높은
rates affecting
금리를 생각보다 잘
So the
견디고
evidence of your eyes
있는
is that the
것을 보고
economy is
있다.
handling much higher rates, at least for now, without difficulty. So notionally, that might tell you that the neutral rate has risen, or it may just tell you that we haven't had rates high enough for long enough. You're right, though. But we have models for everything. We have formulas for everything. Ultimately, as a practitioner, we have to, be focused on what the economy is telling us, even taking lags into account. What's it telling us? Does it feel like policy is too tight right
원래
now?
또 새벽에
No.
자주
No.
있는데 요새는
The evidence is not
아침에
that
운동을
policy is
좀
too tight.
해가지고
So, and we're
운동하니까
5.25% to 5.5%.
Do you think we're
저녁
entering
때니까
into a
빨리
new
지치네요.
phase in monetary policy? We had the
아직은 뭐
vulgar
좋은 얘기는
disinflation,
없는데
I think we referred to it as. And then we had sort of inflation targeting
일단은
for a
좀
time.
중요한
There was
거는
concern about secular
기존에
stagnation.
이야기하던
Pushing the zero
스타일과는
bound,
좀
as you
많이
said. We were
달라졌다는
concerned with that.
거.
And then we had the pandemic,
예전에는
and we
이제
had
그런 거잖아요.
the real problem with inflation.
우리가 뭐
What's the next
80년대
phase
얘기 많이
look
했잖아.
like? How would you describe it?
80년대는
What we've been through is
금리를
in
올렸다 내렸다
all of the
하니까 뭐
advanced
이렇게 했다.
economies around the
이렇게
world
하면서
was a
이제
period
80년대 예시를
where
많이
the
들었는데
effective lower bound, the proximity of
지금은
interest rates,
이제
risk-free interest rates to the effective lower
약간
bound, which is zero or a little bit less, was a big problem for monetary policy.
약간 말을 이제
rates
모호하게
came down
하죠.
and down and down. And the
너무
problem
모호하게
is,
하다.
if rates are going to be close to zero in good times,
뭐죠?
then how do you cut? And so
예전에
that's-
약간
and central
강경하게
banks
얘기를
lost
했잖아요.
the power of their most important tool, which is interest rates. This was a
뭐라고 해야
subject
됩니까?
of
인플레이션이
vast
2%가 될
literature in
때까지
monetary policy
계속
research
하겠다. 뭐
for
이런
20 years.
형태로 이제
And,
얘기를
you know,
했는데
the most common
좀
answer was some
전에는
kind of a
뭐
makeup strategy. So you would credibly promise to
그러니까 말을
run
좀 모호하게
inflation a
하는
little bit
거고요.
hot and above 2%, and that would anchor inflation at 2% to counter the
현재
massive
금리가
inflation.
어떻게 반응하고
So
있는지
that was a
높은
very
금리
serious
생각보다
problem with
잘
filled
견디고
books worth of
있다고
research.
보고
Then
있다.
comes the pandemic.
뭐
Then comes the
이런
response to the pandemic, and then comes the pandemic inflation, not just in the United States but everywhere. The question is,
원래 이게
is that a
아니고
secular change,
파월
or are these factors that
한테서
brought us to that
나와야
place,
될
are they still
얘기가
out
높은
there
금리로
waiting
인해서
to come back? And, you
인플레이션이
know, books are written on this
잘
subject now. You
낮춰지고
can
있다.
argue
이런
that,
얘기가 나와야 되는데
and
Just so you
somehow-
know, quickly, when they talk about effective lower bound, they're talking about
어느 정도 뭐 안정을
0%,
찾고 있다.
0% interest rates. And there was
그래서
a fear
높은
that,
금리를
what if we
유지할
have to go
것이다.
negative?
뭐
That was
이런 게 나와야
before, right?
되는데
Now he's like, oh, we have
예전에
room to
얘기하던
cut. That
것과는
lets us support
많이
the economy if something breaks.
좀 다른
supply shocks
이야기를 하고
that
있군요.
more inflationary pressure. Yeah. And so are we going into such a, I don't know. I mean, all I can tell you, I think it's unknowable, and, you know, great theorists and researchers have different views on this. It's not something you can settle in advance. We'll have to see. I think our issue is right now trying to achieve a sufficiently restricted
쪽이 좀 떨어지고 있나 보네.
policy to bring inflation down to 2% over.
해외 증시가 좀 빠지고 있나 보죠.
Whenever any of us go, particularly institutions, go through tumultuous times, and goodness knows you've been through a tumultuous time.
아닌데?
We look
모르고
back
있는데?
and think, okay, what did we learn? Sort of an after-action report. Look at the pandemic and epidemic inflation. What would you say you learned in terms of macroeconomics, in terms of the economy, from that experience?
So hindsight is always a wonderful thing, right? I think the fair way to judge the actions that were taken is to put yourself in the place of legislators and policy, other,
모르고
you know,
있는데?
and central bankers around the world.
아하 비트
And there was
떨어지는구만.
no playbook. You know, we hadn't seen a global economic shutdown. People were thinking that the pandemic might kill a whole lot of people, and that we wouldn't have a vaccine for 5 years. We might not have an economy for 5 years. So these things were all very possible in March of 2020. And so we pulled out all the stops, and Congress pulled out all the stops. With the benefit of hindsight, could we have done a little bit less and had a little bit of inflation? I guess we could. But I think if you look overall at the performance of the U.S. economy, our economy is the strongest. We're actually also making the most progress on inflation, but we certainly have the strongest growth. We're back to prior growth trend, you know, not just level of where we were. We're actually back to the prior trend. The labor market, the last time we had this many consecutive months of unemployment below 4% was in the late 1960s. So it's more than 50 years ago. So our economy is doing very well from all of that. But you know, if you had perfect hindsight, you might not have had as much inflation if we'd done less. Although other countries who didn't do as much as we did also had substantial inflation problems.
I think my question was just a little bit different. It's not so much of assigning blame or saying, did somebody make a mistake, as are there things that going forward would change the way you conduct monetary policy that you learned from that maybe nobody had reason to know at the time, but it was an experience?
별다른 내용은 없는 것 같은데.
Well, you know, we were in a time of a very long time, in a reasonably long time, of disinflationary forces. And I think everybody's instinct had
뭐 옛날과 지금은 좀 다르다. 뭐 이런 얘기네.
risks coming from this direction, which is too low inflation. And so what this has taught us is that now that period is over, and we now have probably going forward a more balanced set of risks where high inflation and low inflation are both risks. In fact, right now the risk is still high inflation, but I'm assuming once we get back to 2%, we won't have that. But we've certainly learned that, and I mean, events are the possible range of events is so much wider than what we think it is on any given day, right? The tails are so wide, and it's just not human nature to constantly be thinking about things that are way out in the tail, but they happen in financial markets and in economies. They happen far more regularly than they should.
I suspect every person in this room is well aware what's going on with yields.
여전히 인플레이션이 너무 높다.
It's a big story, particularly in the longer end of the curve. What is your understanding of what is going on in the bond market and why those?
플래시는 그래도 많이 떨어졌잖아.
Again,
3%다
at the
이거.
longer end of the curve.
So it's really two questions. One is why is it happening, and the other is why does it matter for policy? And so I would say on the why is it happening question, I think it's appropriate to have a little bit of humility. It's always hard to say exactly what's going on with longer term yields, but this is what I think we can say. First, what it's not. It's not apparently about expectations of higher inflation, and it's also not mainly about shorter term policy moves, so Fed funds moves over the next year or two. Really, if you can look at the 2-year, for example, and 2 years moved up a little bit since September, but really the move is in longer run bonds. So it's really happening in term premiums, which is the compensation for holding longer run securities, and not principally a function of the market looking at near term fund rate. I think a few other ideas about, there are many candidate ideas, and many people feeling their priors have been confirmed by this event, I'll say, as well. But so one would be just that markets and analysts are seeing the resilience of the economy to high interest rates, and they're revising their view
한마디 안 하냐?
of the overall strength of the economy and thinking even longer terms may require higher rates. That could be part of it. There may be a heightened focus on fiscal deficits. That could be part of it. QT could be part of it. Another one you hear very often is the changing correlation between bonds and equities. If we are going forward into a world of more supply shocks rather than demand shocks, that could make bonds a less attractive hedge to equities, and therefore you need to pay more to own
자,
bonds.
파월이 연설
The term
중인데요.
premium goes up. So all of those are
어떤
possible ideas. Then
큰
the
변화가
question is,
있을지
does it
한번
matter
기대해
for
보고
us as long as
있습니다.
we're talking about this? So
현재는 뭐 좀 떨어지고 있네.
the way I think about it is
뭐 그닥 좋은 얘기는 없는 것 같은데.
we change our policy. Actual and expected changes in our policy affect financial conditions, and persistent changes in financial conditions affect economic activity, hiring, and inflation. So one question is, are we seeing the longer run bonds, are they the increases in rates? Are we seeing those come through in financial conditions in a persistent way? And I think if you look at financial conditions,
뭐 채권 관련
the answer so far would be
얘기를 하고
yes, you are.
있군요.
Persistence, it will be a matter of just seeing with our own eyes, but certainly they're coming. If you look at financial conditions indexes, they're showing tightening, and it's a lot because of
테슬라가 더 많이
Then the
떨어졌나 보네.
question is it endogenous, and is it just because the market expects us to take things to take further actions to tighten monetary policy, in which case you have to follow through. But that doesn't seem to be the case. It doesn't seem to be principally about expectations of us doing more. It seems to be that the other factors are the more prominent ones.
Another question is,
Bottom line, though, that
뭐
that
채권이 올라가서
does over time, it makes sense. It's
금융
something that we'll be
시장이 좀
looking at.
빡세다,
well, that's the question I had, is over
타이트하다.
time. From what you understand right now, do you think this is a temporary phenomenon, or do you think there are structural factors, whatever they are, and we can talk about what they might be, that would really this is the future we're looking at now?
So of the factors I just listed, some of them are shorter term, some of them are longer term, and some of them could be either. So for example, concerns over fiscal deficits, that could be a longer term factor. The change in correlations between stocks and bonds could be a longer. I don't think we know. I think basically bond prices are set by supply and demand. The supply of treasuries is a known thing.
파월이 돈 많냐고
Demand
이렇게
can be
얘기하는 것
affected
같은데.
by any and all of these theories, and also just by sentiment.
저기 다른 데서.
Sentiment too, which is hard to characterize. So,
파월이
markets
원래
have been
돈을 많이
volatile.
벌었습니다.
They've been longer.
파월이 뭐 해서
You've
돈
seen the,
벌었다더라.
rates
하여튼
moving
뭐
up
파월이
a lot.
뭐
I
해서
think we
돈
have
엄청
to
많이 벌었어.
let this play out and watch it.
굉장히
For now,
뭐 능력자입니다.
it's clearly a tightening of financial
그러니까 뭐
conditions, and so we'll be
아직도
watching it carefully.
연준
Talking about the
위장을
fiscal side,
하고
and you've been
있겠죠.
very careful repeatedly to say you
뭐
want
해서
to stay in
돈을
your lane. You're
벌었다더라.
not responsible for fiscal issues. At the same time, you have to take into account, and it looks like the United States is going to have to borrow a fair amount of money. By the way, other countries are as well around the world. We have a big supply of treasuries coming on board. To what extent do you think that is a longer-term issue? And let me tie it back to something you referred to in your remarks, actually. When we see geopolitical conflict around the world, like in Israel, like in Ukraine, some of the buildup with respect to China, the defense spending is going to be elevated for the United States and for other countries. Do you take that into account in figuring monetary policy? Because it may well mean that we're borrowing a lot more money than we have in the past.
So we, of course, see the same things that everyone else. I just came back from IMF meetings this weekend, and there's a lot of talk of the very large
중국,
resource demands that
이라크 등등이 어떤
organizations
영향을
like the
미칠 것
IMF and,
같으냐
of course, countries are facing, and the
이렇게
need for
물어봤네요.
substantial amounts of revenue. You mentioned military. There's also dealing with
많은
climate change.
국가들이
So it's
자원을
there's a lot of that.
이제
We don't, as you mentioned, we don't comment on fiscal policy. Actually, the fiscal authorities have oversight over us, and not the other way around. So we stay away from that. So I would say everyone knows that it's not a secret, and about all I can say is we know that we're on an unsustainable path fiscally. It's not that the level of the debt is unsustainable. It's not. It's that the path we're on is unsustainable, and we'll have to get off that path sooner rather than later. It's not really something, though, that affects a monetary policy decision about how much we raise rates in the next 6 months. It's not.
우리나라 위험해서 못 건넨다.
Driven by.
우리 대한민국
If there was some vast new fiscal
대한민국 좀 많이
policy that we're about to be
위험하죠.
enacted, that would have an effect on the models and that affect
건설사들 거의 뭐
directly.
많이 망했다
That would affect us,
하던데.
but we would not be in a position of responding directly to fiscal policy.
When we talk about the treasury market, obviously there's
이러다가 환율 뭐 한 2천까지 올라가는 거 아니냐 이거. 달러 좀 갖고 있어야 되는 거
There's
아닙니까?
also a question of who's buying, and we now have one buyer who stepped out of the marketplace, namely the Fed, which is a big buyer. At the same time, we're getting reports that maybe some of the overseas buyers may be pulling back as well. How do you take that into account in assessing where we're going with long-term bond yields?
So actually, I think buying by overseas entities has actually been pretty robust this year. So there have been some small changes, but I think by and large they've been buying robustly. Again, we look at the broad financial conditions. We look at interest rates, other asset prices. That's what we look at. We're not.
근데 좀 빠지긴 하네.
We don't focus on fiscal policy. We wouldn't change monetary policy because of, for example, because we think that the U.S. is on an unsustainable path. Everyone knows that. We're just going to do monetary policy to achieve maximum employment and stable prices, and that's how we think about it.
I'm curious though, one of the things you're most concerned about is the real economy, what's going on in the real economy. You distinguish yourself from some of your predecessors in that you have a significant exposure to the private sector, not just the public sector, academics. As you talk to CEOs, people in business, what are you hearing about the cost of capital? Because these bond prices are really affecting cost of capital. For the first time in a while, there was a long time the cost of capital felt like it was almost zero. And business changes an awful lot when when the price of money goes up.
I talked to several
대체로 좀 숏을 많이 보고 있구만.
who run companies, and they each
아직은
said that the
모르죠.
economy remains strong.
하여튼 여기서 파월이 한마디만 해주면 되는데
You see,
그죠?
there's some
가장 지금
areas where
기대하는
spending is
거죠.
softening, but
금리
overall, I mean, look at the retail sales. Consumer is strong.
이제 인상을 종료냐
Volume's not going
마지막
up.
올해 연말에 하더라도
Companies are profitable.
어,
You don't, now if you get
하더라도
to
이번이
where I think the cost of
마지막이냐
capital
뭐
would really matter would be
이런
for smaller companies and early stage companies, and that really
There it
does
is.
matter.
이야기를 한번 해주면
So
되는 건데
we don't have a lot of tools. We have interest
지금
rates,
그런
and they're
내용은
far
없는
from
것
perfect.
같은데
It's famously a blunt tool, but it's what we have to get
끝나가나 보고
inflation down, and really the world counts on us to deliver low and stable inflation. That's what we have to do.
여전히 경제가
At a
강력하다.
time like this, we know that we're having negative effects on, we had the home builders in this week. It's a very tough time in the whole home building industry. And,
높은
we
금리는
know that. But ultimately,
누구에게나 힘든
what we want
것이라고
to get
알고
back to
있다.
is a long period of price
그럼 좀
stability.
낮춰라 이놈아.
That's the best thing we can provide, and that policymakers and businesses.
그것 때문에
everyone
최대한
can-
인플레이션
people
빠르게
can just lead their lives not worrying about inflation. This is what
되돌리려고
we can
노력
deliver, what we
중이다.
have to deliver. And this is the time. Our independence is not for times when we're really popular. It's
그럼
for
빨리
when
낮춰라
now when
이놈아.
we're doing something that really the public
이놈이라
counts
하면
on us to
되지.
do.
파월 아저씨.
Notwithstanding that it's challenging and difficult, and higher interest rates are difficult for everybody.
You have not wavered from your commitment to 2%. You did it again today, 2%. No question about it. There are those who suggested, including some colleagues in the Fed, maybe the
30K
bond
가냐고요?
market is doing part of your job for you. Is that the way
30K?
you see it?
30K는 지난번에 갔다 온 거 아닙니까?
Look, I would
그러니까
say
이번에
this,
하면 30K를
the
넘어가야
whole
되겠죠.
idea of tightening policy is to affect
30K 가는 거 보려고 여기 기다리는 건 아닌데.
higher bond rates reflect they do. They're producing
오늘
tighter financial
저기
conditions right now.
방송에 설명해 드릴
That's how monetary
32K를
policy works.
넘어가야 되는데.
That's literally how it works. So, again, in principle, as long as bond rates are going up for some reasons, and they're
나는
not going
조금
up just
올라가고
because they expect us to
있고.
do things, so that if we don't do them, they'll come right back.
다이 뭐 이렇게
And we don't think
뭐
that's the case. It doesn't- I don't think it's the case.
우파적인
It doesn't seem
강경한
like
어조는
that's what
없어서
the analysis
그런지
leads you.
쭉
Then sure, that's a
떨어지진
tightening.
않았네요.
That's exactly what we're trying to achieve.
And therefore, it seems like almost arithmetic. It must reduce some of the impetus for you to.
자, 말을
to
이제
rate
요리조리
That's
돌리고
marginally correct. I
있다고.
mean, I think that remains to be seen. By the way, I'm not blessing any particular
계속
level
돌려서
of
얘기를 한다.
long-term rates, but just in principle, that's right.
So let's talk about the labor market. You referred to that in your remarks as well.
채권이
and
지금
as you
많이
say,
올라갔잖아요.
Vacancies have come down
채권이
some,
많이
although they
올라서.
still are pretty elevated. If I'm not mistaken, quits have actually gone up some. It seems to be a tight labor market. What do you make of what's going on in the labor market?
금융 쪽이
Labor
굉장히
market has been
타이트하다. 뭐
extraordinarily
또
strong. So
아까
what
했던
happened
얘기인데
in the
또 했고.
pandemic was we had a negative labor supply shock is one way to think about it. So a whole lot of people left the labor market when the pandemic happened and then didn't come back. And so when the economy reopened and everybody, there was revenge travel and revenge everything, very strong demand, and there just weren't the people. So you had two job openings for
타이트함에
every person actively seeking employment.
채권
We've never been
수익률의
anywhere close to
상승은
that. There was panic.
연준의 긴축 필요성을 줄여줄 수 있게 할 수 있다.
Had not gotten big
뭐
wage
이렇게
increases
얘기를
and didn't want to
하네요.
come back to work. So
그런 거에 대해서
that's where we were. So since then, there are very many signs that the labor market is getting back into balance, and I talked about some of that in my remarks. Surveys of work, we survey businesses.
그러니까 금리가
We don't do it.
높아서
Other people survey
금리가
businesses and say,
아니고
"Are workers
채권
plentiful?" And that
채권
measure
금리가
was no.
채권
Now it's
수익률이
back to
높아서
pre-pandemic levels.
금준
Survey
연준이
workers,
해야 할
jobs
일을
plentiful, and that was at an all-time high. Now
줄여줬다.
it's still high, but back. So
줄여줬다.
wage increases are coming back down
이렇게
to more
얘기를
normal
했군요.
levels. Job openings are down from 2 to 1.4. They were at 1.2 in the very tight labor market of 2019. By the work week, by so many measures, the labor market is gradually cooling. And part of that is this, all through 2022, we thought we were going to get more labor supply, and we didn't. And I personally thought, well, I guess we won't get any. And then we've gotten a substantial amount this year. The female labor force participation is in prime age workers is at an all-time high, which has to be related in some way to work from home. But labor force participation increased, immigration increased, and now you see that in the overall cooling of the labor market. So even though job creation is still very high, there are the workers to fill those jobs. And again, businesses will tell you it's
일단 뭐
very different. It's still
내년에
a very tight labor
미국의
market.
대선이 있으니까
Coming back to your goal of 2% inflation, what have you learned from this experience about the relationship between inflation and labor? I mean, there's a lot of talk about a Phillips curve, whether it's still 5s, whether it's weaker, what is it? What's your hypothesis right now with the relationship between inflation and labor?
Let me tell you
뭔
what
얘기를
it was
했습니까?
before. So
내년 대선이
one of my
있으니까
favorite charts is just the
아무래도 좀
slope of the
빡세게
Phillips
돌리기엔
curve
좀
over
어렵지
40
않겠나
years.
뭐
So it shows
이런
the relationship between unemployment and inflation. If you go back to the high
있군요.
inflation of the 70s,
거기서 그렇겠지.
there's a very tight relationship.
당장
And
뭐
that relationships went down and down.
대선이
It's like where the
다가오면
Phillips curve, there was almost
그때
no
뭐
relationship.
금리를 올리기엔 좀 그렇잖아요.
The Phillips curve was very, very flat. Now, actually, if you just ignore cause and just look at the data, it will tell you that the relationship is back. Do we really think that's a sustainable thing? I don't know. What happened though was that people came to seriously expect 2% inflation, something like 2% inflation. And if people expect that, if companies expect it and workers expect it and you expect that in your shopping, then that's what'll happen in a way. And that's what happened. So even in
That's the manipulation.
markets, we didn't have high inflation. I was at the Fed since 2012 as unemployment went from 6 to 5 to 4 into the 3s for the first time. And the models were all saying that we should be seeing some inflation, and we never really saw 2% inflation on a sustained basis during that era. So we learned that the Phillips curve was really flat. Some pronounced it dead. Now, I don't think most of the inflation we're seeing at all is from the Phillips curve, though. I think it was really the collision of very strong demand, really strong demand, with with constrained supply. Cars being a great example. Many people wanted cars, didn't want to ride public transportation, wanted to move to the suburbs. Unlimited demand for cars. Interest rates are low. Yet we couldn't get semiconductors, so there are no more cars. Car production went down. How do you solve that problem? Prices just go way, way up for cars. That's how you clear the market.
뭐
So
금리가
that's a
낮아서
classic example of what happened here. It really wasn't
사람들이
about
차를 많이
growth spurt,
샀다.
it was
뭐
more
이런
about
얘기를 하네요.
constrained supply and demand more broadly, especially for goods at the beginning.
Let's turn to another responsibility of yours, which is the banking system. Last March, we had something of a scare because of, I guess, interest rate risk with Silicon Valley Bank and some
떨어져.
others. Are we through that now? Where are we in that process? Are you resting easy?
So what you pay us for is not to rest easy. We don't do that. But I would say where we are is this: things have certainly settled down. We see the funding markets is fine. We see, and we paid a lot of attention to banks that looked anything like the banks that had the problems, and made sure that they had credible liquidity plans and plenty of liquidity and all of that. And so I think
파월
all
아저씨
of that
좋은
is
얘기 안
working.
해주네.
And we set up this facility that's available for banks to borrow. And so all of that has led to a real settling down. But our job is to be on the case, and we're still on the case, and we'll keep after that. Banks are generally very well capitalized and highly liquid in our country. Banks are strong. We benefit from all those years of reform under Dodd-Frank and Basel III that we went through, with former Governor Tarullo and many others. And so we benefit from a very strong, well-capitalized banking system that's much better at managing its risks than the one that entered the global financial crisis.
Very well capitalized, but you want some more. This is
You're
the
talking about
proposal.
the Basel III proposal, which is, it's a rule that's out for comment, so there's not a lot I can say, but we do expect a lot of comment, and we do expect to take those comments very seriously.
Talk about commercial real estate. There are some concerns out there in the marketplace, what's going on, because obviously there's a repricing that comes with your increased rates. It's thought that there's some real estate out there that is not worth the money that was originally financed with it. How concerned should we be about that as something lurking out there that could really affect the system overall, not just the people invested?
So there's work from home, and that's affecting downtown real estate in a lot of big cities, and higher rates as well, as you point out. So this is an issue that we've paid a great deal of very careful attention to. Commercial real estate is not a principal risk or a major risk for the very largest banks. It is much more for regional and really the small banks that have proportionally a much larger exposure to real
유업이
estate,
안
so commercial real
되지만
estate. So what we've
소규모
done is
은행한테는 큰 유업이다.
supervisors are in there looking at real estate portfolios. They're working with banks to make sure that they have plans to deal with the problems they have in their portfolio. These problems evolve over time. They don't land with great suddenness like a market event. And so we're working with all of the bank regulators are working with banks that have concentrations of troubled real estate to work it out. There will be losses for sure. You can drive down through most downtowns, in many downtowns anyway, and see buildings that are empty and things like that. But we're working through it, and we're on that case, and don't see it as as presenting much broader problems. But our job is to make sure that it doesn't.
As you mentioned, regional banks are where a lot of people focus on this. As you conceptualize the banking system, what is the role of the regional banks? We have the super big banks that don't look like they're going anywhere. And we've got the community banks, the smaller banks that we understand are critical, particularly for small businesses and local context. But what about the regional banks? How much pressure is there on them? And what would the damage be to the system if, in fact, there was more consolidation with some of the big banks?
I think the regional banks are very important.
미국의 미국의 은행이 450개가 넘는다.
Which is a lot more than any other country per capita or per dollar.
지구상에서 제일 많다.
We have, our GSIBs, the largest banks, are the leading banks in the world in profitability and in their success in their business. We have community banks and
시스템 리스크에 의한 위험은 없다고 본다.
But we also have these great regionals, and I think they do a great
질문이
business
뭔데
amongst, with many companies, and I do think their business model is under pressure, and I would not like to see us add to that by treating them exactly like GSIBs. I think they don't need exactly the same attention that a GSIB gets. So, but I would say I personally think, and I think we
뭐야,
that
비트 계속
strongly
떨어져.
think that the regionals and the smaller regionals are
파월 아시아 들어가야 떨어지는
important part of
건가?
the banking system.
Okay, you've been very generous with your time. Really appreciate it. I have one last question. Are you having a good time? And,
You
and
mean
if so,
now-
why?
now or-
no. I assume this wasn't that pleasant, but in general, are you enjoying your job?
I would say this. First of all, it's an incredible honor to do this job, and every day I do it, I feel so fortunate, so lucky, and blessed to be entrusted with this. And
어우, 말을
all
길게
I
하면
wanna
참
do is do
죽겠네.
the best job I can for the public.
We're gonna do a summary here in a second.
And yes, there's a lot that is enjoyable about it, but mostly it's just so important to get it right, and that's what we're trying to do.
Thank you so much, Chair
Thank
Powell.
you.
It's really good.
끝났네.
Thanks a lot.
All right, let's do a summary here. There's a lot here to unpackage. Let's try to just keep it as simple as possible. Stand by. All right, here we go.
끝났군요.
Okay.
다음 누군데?
And here, got it.
자, 파월 아저씨 끝났습니다요. 연설은 일단 끝났네요. 어찌 되는 겁니까? 자, 일단 파월은 들어갔고, 뭐 특별히 크게 나쁜 얘기는 안 했고요. 약간 말을 좀 모호하게 하긴 했습니다. 옛날하고는 확실히 많이 다른 느낌으로 얘기를 했네요. 그죠? 예전에는 인플레이션이 심하니까 아직도 심하다, 약간 이런 내용들이 많았는데 자, 운명의 날 비트코인 어떻게 되려나요? 비트코인 조만간 다수의 비트코인 현물 ETF 승인 예상을 하고 있다. 그랬군요. 파월. 자, 속보 파월 의장. 여전히 인플레이션이 높다. 인플레이션 아직 높다. 최근 둔화 신호. 최근 둔화 신호는 시작에 불과하다. 그래도 약간 둔화했다라는 말을 했네요. 그래서 약간 초반에 약간 비둘기적이다라고 했던 게 이런 문제인 것 같네. 자, 계속 강세 유지 시 추가 금리 인상 고려. 추세보다 높은 성장세 지속 시 추가 긴축 필요. 이렇게 얘기했나 보군요. 뭐 미국 경제가 좀 튼튼하다 뭐 이렇게 얘기를 했는데, 참 뭐 못 가는 건가요? 그래도 뭐 단기적으로 좀 올라왔는데, 일단 이 정도 올라간 것만으로도 상당히 나이스한 무빙이고, 여기서 이렇게 꺾어 올라가면 되거든요. 괜찮은 것 같은데, 잠 못 자는 거 아니냐? 계속 이렇게 올라오고 있죠. 여기 아까 오후 방송에서 그죠? 이렇게 언제냐? 내일 올라갈 거라고? 내일이나 모레인데. 우선 이렇게 됐다, 그죠? 자, 자, 이렇게 한번 올리고 내리고 올리고 내리고 샥 딱 이쯤인데 21 죽기 전에 1억을 보냐고요? 1억은 보겠죠. 10억을 못 보고 죽으면 어떡하나 이런 아쉬움이겠지. 10억은 가겠지. 아직 살 날이 많은데 이제 120세 시대라 가지고 100세 시대도 이제 곧 지나가죠. 이제 120세 시대라 가지고 지긋지긋하게 사는데 야 아직 50도 안 됐는데 지금 아니 살 날이 더 많이 남았네 이거. 환장하겠네 이거. 그래도 여러분 이제 풍요롭게 살려면 이제 돈을 좀 많이 갖고 있어야 되겠죠. 그죠? 네, 늦은 시간에 많이도 오셨군요. 뭐 많진 않지만 자, 늦은 시간에 또 시청도 하러 오셨군요. 이 시간에 왜 아직 안 잠으십니까? 2시인데. 자, 나스닥이 좀 떨어졌네. 떨어져 있고. 자, 비트도 이 정도면 굉장히 잘 버티는 중이고. 오, 이제 올라가나? 자, 운명의 날입니다. 운명의 날. 이 어디로 갈 거냐? 10억원 돼야 은퇴 가능하겠죠. 10억 가면은 10억 가기 전에 은퇴할 수 있을걸요. 뭐 1억만 가도 은퇴하죠. 1억만 가도. 비트코인 10억 정도 가면은 이제 잘 성공하면 이제 100억 부자는 뭐 되겠죠. 1억만 가도 충분히 수익은 충분히 되죠. 1억 가면은 이제 이 코인들이 이미 뭐 솔라나 이런 건 뭐 그러니까 솔라나가 이제 잘 비트를 따라갔다고 가정을 했을 때 뭐 30만원 그냥 가겠지, 100만원 그냥 가겠지. 에이다는 뭐 만원 가겠죠. 그 비더는 1000만원 될 테고 뭐 그렇게 되겠죠. 센티넬요? 센티넬 괜찮습니다. 센티넬 프로토콜 지금 얘기해드렸잖아요. 이렇게 되겠고 지금 올라가려고 하는 거라고 해드렸습니다. 아직은 올라가려고 하는 거다. 그죠? 나중에 뭔가 아이고 이제 좀 하락세로 전환하겠다라고 하기 전까지는 올라가는 겁니다. 그게 언제일지 모르죠. 이제 계속 올라가는 겁니다. 이렇게 지금 올라가려고 짜세를 찾고 있는 거예요. 이렇게 지금 다른 코인들 하고 있죠. 그러니까 이거는 뭐 차트 이런 게 문제가 아니고 그냥 이거 있는 그대로 받아들이면 된다고. 날아가고 있잖아요, 그죠? 날아가죠. 그냥 뭐 깊게 생각할 거 없습니다. 깊게 생각할 거 없다. 오늘 날아가잖아요. 날아갔네. 그럼 내 것도 날아가나? 이렇게 생각하면 됩니다. 뭐 어렵고 복잡하게 생각할 거 없다. 날아가잖아요. 그냥 있는 그대로 받아들입니다. 가고 있잖아요. 이건 누가 봐도 가잖아. 가고 있죠. 가잖아요. 얘는 갔다 왔죠. 갔다가 지금 지금 조정을 받고 있는 거죠. 나중에 다시 반등해서 더 올라갈 수 있죠. 이렇게 플리메시 가고 있죠. 이거 아주 대놓고 찍어놨죠. 가고 있잖아요. 그냥 뭐 다 간다고 보면 됩니다. 스택스 가고 있죠. 이렇게 가다가 한번 내리고 뭐 이렇게 하겠죠. 피케 가고 있죠. 이제 피케도 이제 슬금슬금 가고 있네. 피케도 이제 갑자기 가겠죠. 피케는 일단 뭐 200원 가야 안 되겠나 싶은데 골렘이 가고 있죠. 다 가고 있는 겁니다. 이제 홀드도 이제 가고 있죠. 홀드 다 됐네. 여기 딱 잘라 먹고 있죠. 여기 자르면 간다고. 자르면 가는 겁니다. 파동이 이렇게 돼 있는데 여기 파동이 이렇게 돼 있잖아요. 원래 파동이. 근데 여기 가다가 여기서 이렇게 잘라 먹었잖아요. 요 밑에를 이렇게 가다가 지금 여기서 잘라 먹었잖아요. 이렇게 파동이 이렇게 안 내려가고 이거 잘라 먹었죠. 여기 자르면 이거 뚫고 간다는 거죠. 윗라인을. 얘들 다 그렇게 돼 있죠. 지금 간 코인들은 다 그렇게 갔죠. 여기다 보면은 이렇게 파동이 지금 이렇게 보면 파동이 여기가 꼭지잖아요. 그럼 이렇게 가야 되잖아요. 흐름상 여기 가야 되죠. 여기 와야 되잖아요. 여기 안 오고 여기 지금 여기 잘라 먹고 튀어 올라갔죠. 원래 올라갈 때 그렇게 올라갔다. 한 번씩 그려드리잖아요. 이렇게 하다가 이렇게 그려주잖아요. 요게 나오면 올라갔다. 여기가 지금 여기거든. 여기가 여기라고. 여기 같은 거잖아요. 이렇게 되든지 아니면 뭐 이렇게 내려서 이렇게 되든지 이렇게 된단 말이에요. 그 끄트머리가 이렇게 된다고. 파동이요. 또 갔죠. 여기 딱 요 모양 다 가는 거라고. 아드도 갔죠. 폴리도 가고. 자, 이 캐시도 지금 가려고 하고 있죠. 얘도 지금 가려고 하고 있습니다. 이렇게 갑자기 이렇게 올라갔다가 내려왔다가 또 갑자기 이렇게 날아간다고. 이렇게 얘기해드렸죠. 이렇게 한번 오르고 나서 여러가지 유형이 있다고. 그죠? 여러가지 유형이 있는데 그럼 날아간다. 이렇게 이런 유형도 있고 올라가서 그냥 반드시 가다가 한두 번 흔들고 날아가는 애도 있고 유형이 여러가지로. 또 어떤 경우에는 이렇게 올라가는 건가 하다가 쭉 뺐다가 다시 올라가는 경우도 있고. 또 이 큰 여러가지 형태가 있는데 큰 틀은 뭐냐면 큰 틀은 한번 펌핑하고 가다가 다시 올라간다. 이게 중요하죠. 가다가 그냥 가다가 이렇게 올라간다. 그래서 너무 차트를 열심히 볼 필요 없고 그냥 올라가는 겁니다. 이렇게 올라가는 겁니다. 블랙, 골드. 자, 이제 좀 애매한 게 이런 앱토스라고. 그래도 앱토스도 한번 가보려고 하고 있는 것 같은데. 자, 리스크 가고 있죠. 이대로 가고 있습니다. 이렇게 하다가 날아가겠죠. 폴리곤. 얘는 아직 조금 아직 해보 못한 애들이 아직 있다고. 뭐 샌드박스, 폴리곤, 뭐 컨텀, 뭐 에이다, 비센, 뭐 이렇게 아직 해보고 안 한 코인들이 있긴 있는데, 이제 뭐 도지 이런 애들, 크로노스도 아직 어렵죠. 이런 애들 그냥 놔두면 되고, 이클, 리플은 뭐 내려갔다 하긴 좀. 리플은 계속 올라가는 중이잖아요. 리플은 그냥 무한정 올라가고 있죠. 계속 올라가고 있잖아요. 예, 올라가고 있잖아요. 그러니까 아직 리플이 떨어질 때가 안 됐지. 여기서 한 번, 두 번, 이 일반 경로를 지금 벗어난 거잖아요. 세 번 정도. 벗어난 거고, 그냥 이대로 그냥 올라가고 있습니다. 이렇게 쭉. 아직 떨어질 때가 안 됐다는 얘기고, 가스도 아직 조금 힘이 없고, 뭐, 이런 코인들이 있긴 있으나, 약간 애매한 포지션에 있긴 있으나, 뭐 예를 들어 내일 돼가지고 뭐 갑자기 이만큼 탁 올라가 있으면 됩니다. 그죠? 그런 되는 겁니다. 그래서 이제 9시 펌핑이 중요한데 9시에 이제 펌핑해서 올라가면 이 아드처럼 이렇게 오늘 펌핑해서 갔잖아요. 이렇게 하면 이제 가기 시작하는 거지. 또 내리겠죠. 또 올라내려 하다가 가겠죠. 그죠? 이 구간은 이제 수렴한다고. 여기 끝나면 또 올라가겠죠. 원래는 지난번에 뭐 원래라는 게 없지만 자 보면 이렇게 등성을 이렇게 만들죠. 이렇게 만들잖아요. 그럼 지금은 내려왔지만 이제 여기서 꺾고 올라가면 이렇게 올라가는 거거든요. 그러니까 여기는 이제 꺾어서 못 올라갔죠. 여기도 꺾어서 못 올라갔죠. 근데 이거에 이제 이걸 꺾을 수 있다 없다의 기준이 뭐냐면 여기 지금 따라하고 있는 200일선 이거거든요. 200일선. 200일선이 중요하다고 해드렸잖아요. 그럼 지난번 등선을 보면 첫 번째는 200일에 아예 근처도 못 갔고, 자, 두 번째는 200일을 한번 얹어 보려고 했는데 뭔가 확실하게 못 얹고 빠졌죠. 그죠? 대신에 이렇게 시간이 지나면 뭐가 유리해지냐면 이 200일선이 아래로 떨어지기 때문에, 그죠? 코인이 크게 노력 안 해도 자동적으로 이 200일선이 시간이 지나면 아래쪽으로 말려 들어오죠. 지금처럼. 지금은 이 200일선 이만큼 내려왔기 때문에 이 아더가 뭐 특별히 뭐 많이 펌핑 안 해도 조금만 올라가도 이 200일선 올라가게 되거든요. 시간이 지나면 지날수록 쭉 내려가서 더 가면 더 내려오겠지. 그럼 여기서 이제 조금만 올라가도 금방 200일 올라가겠죠. 그래서 이 200일이 쭉 감아서 이렇게 쭉 감아주면 이제 여기가 이제 뭐 아주 크게 올라가는 자리가 되겠죠. 그때는 뭐 아직 한참 남았지만 여기도 보면 그렇잖아요. 자, 여기도 옛날 걸 보면, 자, 여기서도 200일을 자, 얹으려고 하다가 실패. 한번 얹을지도 못하고, 자, 이제 여기서 얹었죠. 여기 얹었잖아요. 그죠? 이렇게 올라간 다음에 여기서 살짝 내려가는 듯 하다 얹었잖아요. 여기 얹었죠. 여기 200일을. 그러고 나서 갔죠. 이렇게 200일을. 그죠? 200일 얹자마자 바로 갔잖아요. 그러면 이번에도 얹으면 가겠죠. 그러면은 뭐 얘는 차트적으로 봤을 때 이렇게 가서 이쯤 가면 되겠네. 그죠? 그리고 내년 뭐 한 중순쯤이네요. 지금 뭐 예상이 뭐 4월이긴 한데 2024에 4월인데 뭐 요거는 꼭 그날은 꼭 그때라고는 단정할 필요는 없고 그냥 이 부근이라고 보면 됩니다. 넓게 봐서 좀 빠르면 뭐 2024년 초고 뭐 1월부터일 수 있고, 늦으면 뭐 2024년 연말일 수도 있고, 그것도 아니면 2025년이 될 수도 있고, 뭐 그거는 약간 좀 넓게 보면 됩니다. 그냥 오면 오는가 보다, 오는가 보다, 뭐 불장이구나. 진리카요? 이 야밤에 궁금한 게 많으시군요. 진리카는 아직은 조금 있어야 되겠죠. 그럼 진리카는 이제 희망을 조금 걸어보자면, 그래도 이 아래쪽에 있지 않고 여기 지금 이제 요 200일선과 50일선 그나마 위에 있다는 거, 이렇게 확대를 좀 해보면 지난번에 이제 이 51선 아래로 약간 흘렀다가 아래로 좀 빠졌다가 그리고 다시 올라왔잖아요. 그죠? 그러면 이 진리카가 아래로 떨어지는 유형이 되려면 지금 아래로 빠진 이후에 이 200일선과 50일선 저항을 맞고 이렇게 내려와야 되거든요. 근데 이 50일선과 200일 위로 올라갔잖아요. 둘 다 깨고 올라갔잖아요. 그러면 이제 여기서 버티고 올라가면 되죠. 버티고만 올라가면. 그러면은 내일이나 한 2-3일 정도, 내일 당장 뭐 그럴지는 모르고 한 2-3일 정도 뭐 이렇게 빨간봉, 또 파란봉, 또 빨간봉, 파란봉, 조금 더 올라가서 빨간봉, 또 조금 내려와서 파란봉, 다시 빨간봉, 이렇게 요 부분을 좀 유지만 해줘도 좋고, 혹시나 내일 뭐 갑자기 빨간불 좀 나오고 그 다음날 또 이렇게 갑자기 좀 펌핑 나올 수도 있겠죠. 그래서 진리카는 뭐 당장 갈지까지는 모르겠으나 요 며칠만 잘 버티면, 요 며칠만 200일선에 50일선에서 좀 잘 버티기만 하면 올라가겠죠. 그래서 뭐 좀 크게 급등이 없다 그러면 한 이쯤 노리면 되겠죠. 이거 언제? 10월 초네 오늘. 11월 초. 11월 초쯤 좀 늦으면 갈 거고, 뭐 고전에 빨리 가면 뭐 다행이고요. 빨리 가주면 다행이고, 아니면 이제 이 추세를 밟고 올라갈 수도 있으니까. 이 추세가 아직 살아있잖아요. 추세대로 얘기하면, 추세대로 보자면 여기서 내리면 뭐 한 이 정도에서 반등 치겠죠. 이렇게. 그래서 이래나 저래나 현재로서는 조금 뭐 며칠 시간이 걸리지 않겠나. 스택스 잘 가고 있고. 자, 폴리메시 드디어 200원 달성을 했군요. 200원에 매도 걸어놨는데 팔려버렸어. 토스 리스크. 자, 원놈이 갔냐? 아, 비트 어떻게 됐노? 비트 안 떨어졌네. 버티고 이대로 버티면 되겠네요. 이대로 버티면 좀 올라가면 스탑 걸어놓고 자면 되겠네. 트레일링 걸어놓고 자면 되겠네. 이거 몇 번 하다 보니까 이렇게 해서 걸어놓고 자도 되겠더라고. 여기다 걸어놓고 자. 그렇습니다. 오늘 뭐 파월 아저씨가 좋은 얘기해서 한번 날라가나 기대는 해봤는데 그러진 않았고 뭐 나쁘진 않았으니까 뭐 다행이라고 생각해야 되나. 자, 솔라나 이대로 뭐 밤새 올라갈 지경이구만. 솔라나도 롱 쳐놓고 아까 먹었었는데, 아 룸도 지금 떨어졌길래 샀는데 더 떨어졌네. 이씨. 룸 얼마야? 룸 130원. 실화냐 이거. 132원. 헐, 반등이 있긴 있는 거냐. 자, 일단 좀 사보긴 했는데, 솔라나 얼마나 올렸습니까? 아까에서 좀 펌핑을 했고요. 여기서 2.41 여기서 팔리. 아, 저 밑에서 팔렸네. 그랬습니다. 자, 내일. 자, 일단 비트 뭐 4시간 봉으로 좋네요. 이거 자면 안 될 것 같은데. 4시간 이따 4시간 언제야? 5시 5시에 이 빨간 봉 되면 이거 오이씨 맞는 건가 이게? 자면 안 될 것 같은데 잠 죽겠네 이거. 자면 안 될 것 같은데 켜놔야 되겠다 방송. 얘들 켜놓고 운명의 날 하얀색으로 바꿔요. 하얀색이 잘 보이긴 하네. 운명의 날. 일단 켜놓고 자야 되겠다. 자, 갑시다 여러분. 주무시고 스탑은 걸어놔야지. 스탑 걸어놓고 얼마 걸어야니까. 혹시 모르니까 스탑 걸어놓고 잘도 주무시고요. 내일 낮에 일찍 일어나면 한번 와보고요. 방송해보고요. 켜놓고 자야 되겠다.
I made it through everything I never thought I would. Heading back, now I'm here and it just feels so good. We're alive, we can breathe, now let's break some rules. It's time to jump, time to scream, can we act like fools? I deserve a little bit of fun. You and I until the sun comes up. I deserve a little bit of fun. Let me feel a million pretty spots. pushing my emotions. All these pictures in my head have got a reason not to tell. Can you break? Is it safe? Can you hold? Run my way. Can you wait? Can you stay? Can you stop talking this way? All these pieces that are long gone, leaving memories that are so strong. I will let you guess instead. Seeing light in your eyes and the sun in your smile. Let's just sit and talk for a while. Seeing colors and flowers on the edge, and I try to catch myself, but I'm too far ahead now. In the meanwhile, I'll just keep it to myself. Letting it all get to me, but oh, I've got to say I've never had as many trouble finding ways to get away. Seeing peace in your way. Can you stay? Can you stop talking this way? All these pieces that are long gone, leaving memories that are so strong. All these pieces that are long gone, leaving memories that are so strong. In the meanwhile, I'll just all these pieces that are long gone, leaving memories that are so strong. Can you break? Is it safe? Can you hold? Running my way. Can you wait? Can you stay? Can you stop talking this way? Can you break? Is it safe? Can you hold? Running my way. Your eyes and despair in your smile. Let's just sit and stare for a while. Seeing colors and flowers on the edge, and I try to catch myself, but I'm so far ahead now. All these pieces that are long gone, leaving memories that are so strong. Keep it to myself. All these pieces that are long gone, leaving memories that are so strong. just one timely look to dance and fall your way into love, and that's how you'll know he's the one. It feels like way back when. I wish I had known it then. There's no such thing as a soulmate, 'cause love is what you make of it. I think I've got a taste of it. I wish I had known all of this before. I wish I had known, but at least now I know. I thought summer vacation would never end. That feeling of sinking toes in the sand. They said to enjoy it while you can, but those words never seem to land. It feels like way back when. I wish I had known it then. That time is the quickest of thieves. She won't ever be caught by nobody. She'll run all the way to eternity. I wish I had known all of this before. I wish I had known, but at least now I know. It feels like way back when. I wish I had known it then. That soon we'll be gone with the final breath, and there won't be time to hold on to regrets. But I know there's something on the other end. I wish I had known all of this before. I wish I had known, but at least now I know. I wish I had known, but at least now I know. For the sake of love, I've been trying to reveal it, what I've been so afraid of. Your coldness makes my heart go weak, so numb that I can barely speak. This pain keeps water in the sea. If I weren't so desperate to be free, I'd keep my distance, babe. The more that I know about you, the more that I want you, baby. They say that good love will yield the best from me. I know it to be true. This moment won't last forever. No remedies whatsoever. These feelings we choose to pass on for lesser love. You know it to be true. I'm lost in a manic dream. It weighs on me endlessly. Your tenderness drifts in the wind. The depth of your love is a sin. I'll keep my distance, babe. It's all by design, blinded in the fog of love. Why don't you tell me, baby? What are you dreaming of? Dreaming of? The more that I know about you, the more that I want you, baby. They say that good love will yield the best from me. I know it to be true. This moment won't last forever. No remedies whatsoever. These feelings we choose to pass on for lesser love. You know it to be true. You don't know what is it we're saying. You don't know, you don't care. All you know is honey that you're faking. You don't know, you don't care. We're all having fun, bathing in the sun. We're all building castles, castles in the sand. We're having fun, we're having fun. You don't know, what is it we're hiding? You don't know, it's not fair. All you know is, darling, that we're fake. 젖히고 그 길 위에 비 다섯 번째의 계절 같은 자리에 반짝이던 별처럼 떠난 적 없는 널 이제야 알게 된 걸 지나간 기억은 풍경으로 남아 바람길 따라 흩어진 너와 함께한 시간 다시 그때로 돌아가 함께 할 수만 있다면 빛으로 물들어 우린 이제는 다시 내게 Here's my parade 겨울이 가고 또다시 봄이 오듯 희미한 빛도 제자리를 찾아 너와 지새던 긴 밤의 추억이 꽃을 피우던 날 잊혀지지 않는 하루하루의 흔적 지나간 기억은 풍경으로 남아 바람길 따라 흩어진 너와 함께한 시간 다시 그때로 돌아가 함께 할 수만 있다면 빛으로 물들어 우린 이제는 다시 내게 Here's my parade chasing down the sun, but suddenly I can see everything evergreen. I won't pretend I ever found my way. I've made my healthy share of fair mistakes. Still learning the give and the take. But I'm seeing everything through brand new eyes. Taking in the world through different light. Thought I wasted all my life, but I think I changed my mind. I was done growing up, had enough of chasing down the sun, but suddenly I can see everything evergreen. I won't profess I've got it figured out. I know I'm only getting started now. Still learning the ups and the downs. But I'm seeing everything through brand new eyes. Taking in the world through different light. Thought I wasted all my life, but I think I changed my mind. I was done growing up, had enough of chasing down the sun, but suddenly I can see everything evergreen. It's all in our hands, this life of time that's given to us all. It gathers round each night, each morn. We watch it pass and grow. It is all in our hands, it is all in our trying to find the light. Nothing here is right, feeling dead inside. Everything feels like a dream, it's all gone wrong. Waiting for a call, holding on to hope. Hold me closer, hold me closer. Please don't leave me now. Hold me closer, hold me closer. I can't lose you now. Can we take it back? Try and start again. My heart hurts like hell. This can't be the end. I just can't let go. I still need you here. I'm scared of what I'll feel. Let's just stay right here. Hold me closer, hold me closer. Please don't leave me now. Hold me closer, hold me closer. I can't lose you now. Hold me closer now. Hold me closer now. Hold me closer now. I can't lose you now. Please don't leave me now. Hold me closer, hold me closer. Please don't leave me now. Hold me closer, hold me closer. I can't lose you now. Paralyzed state of mind. Still my eyes go drip, drop, drip, drop, drip, drop. Try to find the other side. While the sky is going drip, drop, drip, drop. Love has a fate. The dead is piling up, it seems. No guarantees. We'll see if it's meant to be. I beg of you, please not today. The sun's finally out. I just wanna play. I feel it in the ether. I feel it in the air. I feel it in the color. It's faded and clear from the noise. When it goes tick tock, tick tock, tick tock. Letting go, hard control. Even though I wanna be locked, love has a fee. The dead is piled up like the leaves. No guarantees. Can we just enjoy the breeze? I beg of you, please not today. Maybe it's too hard, maybe it's too far, but I feel it in the ether, and I feel it in the air. Drip drop, drip drop, drip drop, boo. Drip drop, drip drop, drip drop, boo. Now I'm made it through everything I never thought I would. Hell and back, now I'm here and it just feels so good. We're alive, we can breathe, now let's break some rules. It's time to